Marcus Chen had always been a light sleeper, a trait that served him well during his years as a software engineer working late-night debugging sessions. But nothing had prepared him for the soft shimmer of blue light that began filtering through his bedroom window at exactly 11:47 p.m. on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday night. He lay still in his bed, initially assuming it was probably just the neighbor's new security light malfunctioning again. The apartment complex had been upgrading their systems lately, and weird lighting issues had become commonplace. But as the minutes ticked by, the light grew brighter and more focused, casting strange geometric patterns across his ceiling that definitely weren't coming from any terrestrial source. Marcus pushed himself up on his elbows, squinting toward the window. The light wasn't coming from outside at all. It was somehow emanating from within his room, growing stronger near the corner where he kept his old gaming chair and a stack of technical manuals. The air itself seemed to be glowing, particles dancing in ways that defied basic physics as he understood them. Then he heard the sound. It started as a low humming, almost like the electrical buzz of old fluorescent lights, but with harmonics that made his teeth ache and his vision blur slightly. The sound grew more complex, developing layers and rhythms that seemed almost musical, if music could be composed by beings who had never heard human melodies. Marcus reached for his phone, muscle memory kicking in despite the surreal circumstances. He needed to record this, whatever this was. But when his fingers found the device, the screen remained black no matter how many times he pressed the power button. Not just dead. Completely unresponsive. As if it had never been a functioning piece of technology at all. The humming reached a crescendo, and suddenly the light coalesced into a definite shape. What had been diffuse illumination now formed a perfect oval, hovering about 3 feet off the ground. The portal, because that's clearly what it was, despite how impossible it seemed, rippled like water, but with edges that remained perfectly defined. Marcus found himself torn between the rational urge to run and the deeper human instinct to understand what he was witnessing. His scientific mind, trained through years of logical problem-solving, insisted there had to be an explanation. Hallucination brought on by stress. Some kind of elaborate prank. A gas leak causing weird sensory distortions. But his eyes were telling him a different story entirely. The portal surface began to shift, becoming more transparent, revealing glimpses of what lay beyond. Marcus caught sight of a vast chamber with walls that seemed to curve in directions his eyes couldn't quite follow, lit by the same blue radiance but somehow more intense. And there were figures moving within that space. Tall, slender forms that definitely weren't human. 2 of them approached the portal from the other side, moving with a fluid grace that reminded Marcus of dancers or perhaps deep-sea creatures. They paused just beyond the threshold, and he could see them more clearly now. They were humanoid but distinctly alien, with elongated limbs and faces that held familiar features arranged in subtly wrong proportions. Their skin had a pale, almost translucent quality, and their eyes were larger than human eyes should be, reflecting the blue light with an inner luminescence. What struck Marcus most, however, was how identical they appeared to be. Not just similar, absolutely identical, as if they were living mirror images of each other. Twins, but created by some alien process he couldn't begin to comprehend. The twins seemed to be communicating, though Marcus heard no words. Their heads tilted toward each other in perfect synchronization, and their large eyes flickered with patterns of light that pulsed back and forth between them. After several minutes of this silent conversation, they turned their attention toward him. Marcus felt his breath catch as those alien eyes focused on him. There was intelligence there, unmistakably, but it was intelligence filtered through a completely different evolutionary path. These beings had developed consciousness in ways that had never occurred on Earth, and he found himself wondering what they thought when they looked at him. One of the twins, Marcus arbitrarily designated it as the left one, extended what appeared to be a hand toward the portal. Its fingers were longer than human fingers, with an additional joint that allowed for movements that looked almost hypnotic. As the hand passed through the portal's surface, the air in Marcus's room shimmered, and he felt a change in pressure that made his ears pop. The sensation convinced him this wasn't a hallucination. Whatever was happening, it was real in a way that had immediate physical effects on his environment. He could smell something now too. Not unpleasant, but completely unfamiliar. It reminded him vaguely of ozone mixed with something floral, but floral in the way an alien garden might smell. The second twin stepped closer to the portal, and Marcus realized they were preparing to come through. Part of him wanted to scramble backward, to put distance between himself and whatever was about to enter his reality. But a larger part, the part that had always driven him to understand how things worked, kept him frozen in place, watching with a mixture of terror and fascination. The left twin's head emerged through the portal first, and Marcus got his first clear look at an extraterrestrial being. The face was hauntingly beautiful in its alienness, with features that seemed designed by an artist who had heard descriptions of human faces but had never actually seen one. The eyes were the most striking feature, not just larger than human eyes but structured differently, with pupils that shifted shape and irises that contained flecks of the same blue light that filled the portal. When the being spoke, its voice carried the same harmonic complexity as the earlier humming, but now it formed something that Marcus's brain could almost interpret as language. The sounds weren't quite words, but they conveyed meaning in ways he didn't understand. Somehow, he found himself grasping fragments of intent, if not actual translation. Curiosity. That was the primary emotion he sensed from the being's communication, not hostility or indifference, but genuine curiosity about him, about his species, about the world beyond the portal. The realization was somehow both reassuring and deeply unsettling. The first twin fully emerged into Marcus's room, followed immediately by its identical companion. They stood just inside the portal, their heads turning in perfect unison as they examined their surroundings. Their gaze lingered on objects that Marcus had never really thought about. The electric outlet by his desk, the poster from his college physics department, the small cactus he'd somehow managed not to kill sitting on his windowsill. Marcus watched as they approached these mundane items with the same careful attention he might give to artifacts from a lost civilization. The right twin extended a finger toward the light switch, stopping just short of contact, while its companion focused on the physics poster with what could only be described as intense concentration. The poster showed a diagram of the electromagnetic spectrum, something Marcus had looked at thousands of times without really seeing. But as the alien studied it, he found himself seeing it through new eyes. What must this represent to a being whose entire understanding of reality had developed on a completely different world? What gaps existed between human science and whatever knowledge these creatures possessed? The twins turned their attention back to Marcus, and he felt the weight of their scrutiny. They approached slowly, their movements careful and deliberate, clearly aware that they might be frightening him. When they were about 6 feet away, they stopped and began that same light-pattern communication he'd observed earlier. After a few moments, the left twin reached into what Marcus hadn't noticed was a device attached to its torso, not clothing exactly, but some kind of technological interface that seemed to be integrated with its body. It produced a small object that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a piece of crystal, holding it up so Marcus could see. The device's surface began to glow, and suddenly Marcus could hear something that sounded almost like English, though filtered through layers of electronic processing that made it seem like it was coming from very far away. "Greetings, human designate," the voice said, each word carefully pronounced but with an accent unlike anything from Earth. "We extend peaceful intentions and request permission for cultural exchange protocol." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, realizing he had no idea what cultural exchange protocol might entail. The twins waited patiently, their large eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that suggested they were reading far more from his expression than he realized he was conveying. Hello, he finally managed, feeling completely inadequate. "I'm Marcus. You're really not from around here, are you?" The translation device processed his words, and he could see the twins' reaction in the subtle changes in their posture and the patterns of light that flickered across their eyes. The right twin responded, its words coming through the device with the same electronic filtering. "Correct assessment. We originate from star system designated in your language as Kepler 442. We are research specialists investigating developing civilizations. Your species has recently achieved preliminary electromagnetic manipulation capabilities, warranting direct observation protocols." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as the implications of that statement sank in. Humanity was being studied, observed, evaluated by beings with technology so advanced they could create portals between worlds. The question that immediately formed in his mind was whether humanity was passing or failing whatever test was being conducted. "Research specialists?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "What kind of research?" The twins exchanged another series of light patterns before the left one responded. "We investigate adaptation potentials and survival probabilities for species approaching technological adolescence. Many civilizations reach this development stage. Few progress beyond it successfully." The casual way the alien delivered what amounted to news about the potential extinction of human civilization left Marcus speechless. He found himself thinking about every science fiction movie he'd ever seen, Every story about first contact, and realizing that none of them had quite prepared him for the reality of sitting in his bedroom at midnight, having a conversation about humanity's future with beings from another star system. What determines whether a species progresses successfully, he asked, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know the answer.
Multiple factors require evaluation, came the response. Technological wisdom, social cohesion capabilities, environmental stewardship, individual adaptation flexibility, conflict resolution mechanisms, creative problem-solving under pressure conditions. Marcus noticed that the twins had been moving slowly closer during their conversation, now standing close enough that he could see details of their alien physiology. Their skin wasn't just pale, it was actually translucent in places, revealing what looked like circulation systems that glowed with the same blue light as their eyes. They had no visible hair, and their heads were slightly larger in proportion to their bodies than human heads would be. "Are you here to test me specifically?" Marcus asked, beginning to understand that his midnight encounter might not be as random as it had initially seemed. The right twin tilted its head in a gesture that seemed almost human, despite coming from a decidedly non-human being. Individual testing provides insufficient data scope. However, individual responses contribute to overall species assessment. Your behavior patterns since portal activation have been recorded and analyzed. Marcus felt another chill.
They'd been watching him, studying his reactions, probably from the moment the strange light had first appeared. Every decision he'd made, staying in bed, trying to use his phone, remaining to watch instead of fleeing, had been part of some kind of evaluation he hadn't even known he was taking.
"What have you learned so far?" he asked, surprised by his own boldness. Curiosity supersedes fear response. Logical analysis attempts despite unprecedented circumstances. Communication willingness with unknown entities.
These indicate positive adaptation potential, the left twin responded. However, individual assessment insufficient for species-wide conclusions.
Marcus found himself wondering how many other humans around the world might be having similar encounters at this very moment. Were there other portals opening in bedrooms and laboratories and offices across Earth? Were his fellow humans passing or failing their own midnight tests? "What happens next?" he asked. The twins exchanged their light pattern communication again, this conversation lasting longer than the previous ones. Marcus got the impression they were discussing something significant, possibly even debating. Finally, the right twin addressed him again. "Protocol allows for extended observation period. Initial assessment suggests potential compatibility for advanced cultural exchange. However, decision pending completion of broader evaluation parameters." "What is..." "This is the book. It's about history." "Ah, how long will that take?" "Temporal measurement translations indicate approximately your planetary rotation periods numbering 72. Marcus did quick math. 72 days.
Just over 2 months for humanity to prove it deserved to survive whatever cosmic graduation test it was apparently taking. "Will I see you again?" he asked, realizing as he said it how much he hoped the answer would be yes.
Despite the fear and confusion, this was the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to him, and the thought of returning to his normal life without ever knowing the outcome seemed unbearable. "Individual contact authorization granted pending behavioral consistency," the left twin replied. "Additional sessions scheduled at regular intervals. Participation voluntary but encouraged for optimal data collection." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was agreeing to. The twins began moving back toward the portal, which had remained stable throughout their entire conversation. As they approached it, the device one of them carried began glowing more brightly, and the translation voice spoke again. "Human designate Marcus, your cooperation acknowledged with gratitude. Cultural exchange protocol initiated successfully. Subsequent contact in 48-hour intervals. Maintain discretion regarding encounter details until evaluation completion."
"Wait!" Marcus called out as they stepped toward the portal. "What should I call you? Do you have names?"
The twins paused, their heads turning back toward him in perfect synchronization. After a moment of their silent light communication, the right twin responded. "Individual designations unnecessary for our species. However, for human comfort, temporary designations acceptable. You may use sound symbols Echo and Nova." Echo and Nova. The name seemed strangely appropriate for beings who existed in perfect duplication yet had traveled across vast distances of space to study his world. "Thank you," Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was thanking them for. The twins, Echo and Nova, stepped through the portal one after another, disappearing back into their alien realm. The portal itself began to shrink, its blue light growing dimmer until it finally winked out of existence, leaving Marcus alone in his bedroom with only the lingering scent of ozone and alien flowers as proof that the encounter had been real. He sat in the darkness for a long time afterward, his mind racing through everything that had just happened. In the space of less than an hour, his understanding of the universe had been completely revolutionized.
Humanity wasn't alone. Earth was being observed and evaluated, and somehow he had become part of a cosmic test that would determine the future of his entire species. Marcus reached for his phone again, and this time it responded normally to his touch.
The screen showed 12:31 a.m., meaning the entire encounter had lasted less than an hour. He opened his camera app and took a picture of the corner where the portal had been, but the image showed only his normal bedroom, with no trace of the extraordinary events that had just unfolded. As he finally lay back down, Marcus realized that his life had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more important than it had been when he'd gone to sleep. In 48 hours, Echo and Nova would return, and he would have another chance to help humanity prove it deserved a place among the stars. The question that kept him awake for the rest of the night was simple but terrifying. What if humanity failed the test?
What happened to civilizations that didn't progress successfully beyond technological adolescence? And more importantly, what could one software engineer from a small apartment complex possibly do to help his entire species pass an evaluation administered by beings who could travel between star systems as easily as he could walk between rooms?
Marcus stared at the ceiling until dawn broke through his windows, knowing that everything had changed and that the next 2 months would determine not just his own fate but the fate of every human being on Earth. The next 48 hours passed with agonizing slowness. Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on his work, constantly glancing at the corner of his bedroom where the portal had appeared. He'd taken measurements, drawn diagrams, and even set up a small camera pointed at the spot, though he doubted it would capture anything more than his phone had. During his lunch break on Wednesday, he'd spent hours researching everything he could find about the Kepler 442 system. Located roughly 1,200 light-years from Earth, it was indeed a real stellar system with potentially habitable planets. The fact that Echo and Nova had referenced it by humanity's designation rather than their own suggested they'd been studying human astronomical knowledge for some time. Marcus had also wrestled with their warning about maintaining discretion.
Every instinct told him he should contact someone, the government, NASA, the scientific community, but something about the twins' manner had convinced him that premature disclosure might jeopardize not just his own future contact, but humanity's evaluation as a whole.
If Earth was truly being tested, then perhaps how humans handled sensitive information was part of that test.
On Thursday evening, he sat in his bedroom at 11:30 p.m., having positioned himself where he could observe the portal location while remaining far enough back to avoid startling his visitors. He prepared a list of questions, though he suspected the conversation would take directions he couldn't anticipate.
At exactly 11:47 p.m., the blue light began to manifest again. This time, Marcus felt more prepared for the sensory assault of the portal's formation. The humming seemed less jarring, and he found he could observe the process more analytically. The portal didn't simply appear, it was constructed, layer by layer, as if reality itself was being carefully folded to create a passage between worlds. Echo and Nova emerged together, their movements as synchronized as before. But Marcus noticed subtle differences this time.
They seemed more confident in the human environment, less cautious in their movements. The translation device appeared in Nova's hand almost immediately, suggesting they'd anticipated continuing their conversation.
Human designate Marcus. Nova's electronically filtered voice filled the room. Behavioral consistency confirmed. Discretion protocols maintained successfully. Secondary contact session initialized. Hello, Echo and Nova, Marcus replied, finding it easier to speak naturally this time. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I have questions. Questions indicate continued curiosity response. Positive assessment marker. Echo responded through the device. Information exchange beneficial for evaluation protocols. Proceed with inquiry submissions. Marcus had debated which question to ask first, but one had kept him awake both nights since their initial meeting.
You mentioned that many civilizations reach technological adolescence, but few progress beyond it successfully. What happens to the ones that fail? The twins exchanged their light pattern communication, the conversation lasting longer than previous exchanges.
Marcus was beginning to recognize that longer discussions between them typically preceded answers to more significant questions. Unsuccessful civilizations experience various termination vectors, Nova finally responded.
Self-destruction through warfare applications of emerging technologies. Environmental destruction through insufficient resource wisdom.
Social collapse through inability to manage information complexity. Stagnation through fear of advancement consequences. But what happens to them? Marcus pressed. Do you intervene? Try to help them? Or do you just watch them fail?
Another exchange of lights, this one seeming almost heated, though Marcus couldn't be sure he was interpreting alien emotional expressions correctly. Intervention protocols violated species sovereignty principles, Echo replied. Each civilization must achieve advancement through internal capability development. External assistance produces dependency scenarios, preventing authentic evolutionary progress. Observer status maintained until species demonstrates independent survival viability. Marcus felt a chill run through him. Humanity was entirely on its own.
These advanced beings capable of traveling between stars and creating portals between worlds would simply watch and record as human civilization either succeeded or destroyed itself. How many species have you observed? He asked. Current observation cycle includes 47 developing civilizations across local galactic region, Nova responded. Historical records indicate observation of 312 species reaching technological adolescence within past millennia time frame. And how many of those 312 succeeded? The silence stretched longer than any of their previous communication delays.
When Echo finally responded, the electronic translation seemed to carry weight that transcended the mechanical filtering. 17 achieved advancement beyond technological adolescence.
29 remain under current observation. 266 experienced termination events.
Marcus did the math quickly, and the numbers hit him like a physical blow. Roughly 5% success rate.
The vast majority of civilizations that reached humanity's current level of development failed to survive their own technological capabilities. Humanity wasn't just being tested, it was participating in a cosmic lottery with devastating odds.
What makes the difference? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What separates the successful species from the ones that fail? Multiple correlation factors identified through extensive analysis. Nova replied.
Successful species demonstrate several consistent characteristics. Rapid adaptation to changing circumstances.
Collective problem-solving capabilities that transcend individual interests. Willingness to sacrifice immediate benefits for long-term survival. Ability to maintain cultural identity while embracing necessary change.
Echo added. Most significant factor, species' capacity for internal cooperation despite external pressure conditions. Failed civilizations typically fragment under stress.
Successful civilizations achieve greater unity through challenge response.
Marcus thought about the current state of human civilization. Political divisions, economic inequality, climate change debates, international tensions, and felt his heart sink.
By the aliens' criteria, humanity seemed to be trending toward the failure category. There's something else I need to understand, Marcus said.
Why me? Why are you making contact with an individual rather than governments or scientific institutions? Individual contact protocols serve multiple evaluation purposes, Echo explained. Government entities frequently respond to first contact scenarios with security classifications and military considerations. Scientific institutions often prioritize research potential over wisdom development.
Individual responses provide insight into species-wide characteristics without institutional filtering. Nova continued the explanation.
Additionally, individual contact allows for real-time assessment of adaptation capabilities. Your responses to unprecedented circumstances reflect broader species' potential for handling major paradigm shifts.
Marcus realized he was being used as a representative sample of humanity, a single data point from which these beings were drawing conclusions about his entire species. The responsibility was overwhelming, but it also sparked something else, a determination to prove that humans deserve to survive and advance.
What can I do to help humanity's chances, he asked. The twins' light communication lasted several minutes this time, and Marcus got the impression they were discussing something significant. When Nova finally responded, there was something different in the electronic tone. Question indicates species beneficial orientation rather than individual survival focus. Positive assessment indicator.
However, direct assistance guidance violates non-interference protocols. Evaluation must reflect authentic species capabilities.
But you can tell me what you're looking for, Marcus pressed. What specific things do successful civilizations do differently? Another exchange of lights. Shorter this time?
Observation focus areas may be shared without violating protocols, Echo replied. Successful civilizations demonstrate rapid information integration capabilities. When presented with new realities, they adjust behavioral patterns quickly rather than denying evidence. They also show enhanced cooperation under pressure rather than increased competition. Marcus felt like he was being given pieces of a puzzle, clues about how humanity could improve its chances without direct intervention from these advanced observers. Are there other humans you're making contact with? He asked. Current evaluation protocol includes 47 individual contact scenarios across diverse geographic and cultural regions, Nova responded. Each contact provides different perspective on species' adaptability potential. Marcus wondered about those other 46 people around the world who were having encounters similar to his own. Were they asking the same questions? Drawing the same conclusions about humanity's precarious position? Were they feeling the same crushing weight of representing their entire species? Can you tell me about the successful species? Marcus asked. What were they like? Echo and Nova exchanged what seemed like an extended conversation through their light patterns before responding. Successful species demonstrate common characteristic patterns despite diverse biological and cultural origins, Echo replied. Example designation: Kithara Collective achieved advancement after planetary environmental crisis. Response involved immediate global cooperation and resource redistribution. Individual territorial claims abandoned in favor of species survival priorities, Nova added. Example designation: Meridian Empire faced technological weapon development crisis. Response involved voluntary disarmament and establishment of collective oversight systems. Military competition redirected toward exploration and research applications. Example designation: Zephyr Confederation encountered information technology disruption. Response involved enhanced education systems and collective decision-making protocols. Individual knowledge became community resource rather than competitive advantage. Marcus was beginning to see a pattern. The successful species had faced similar challenges to those confronting humanity: environmental crisis, weapons technology, information disruption, but they'd responded with cooperation and collective action, rather than competition and conflict. How much time does humanity have to prove itself? He asked. Evaluation timeline spans 72 planetary rotation cycles from initial contact date, Nova replied. Current assessment indicates 37 days remaining. Final determination made based on comprehensive behavioral pattern analysis across all observation points. Just over a month. 30 to 7 days for humanity to demonstrate it deserved to join whatever galactic community existed beyond Earth's small corner of space. What happens if humanity passes the evaluation? Marcus asked. Successful species receive invitation to join Galactic Cooperative Network, Echo responded. Advanced technology sharing protocols activated. Cultural exchange programs initiated. Resources for interstellar exploration provided. Species sovereignty maintained while cooperative benefits granted. The description painted a picture of a vast interstellar civilization that humanity could join, but only if it proved worthy of membership. Marcus tried to imagine what human society might become with access to alien technologies and resources, but the possibilities were almost too vast to comprehend. And if humanity fails? The pause was longer this time, and when Nova responded, the electronic voice seemed to carry genuine regret. Failed species continue independent development without interference. Observation protocols terminated. No further contact authorized. Natural, evolutionary processes allowed to proceed without external influence. Marcus understood what wasn't being said directly. Failed species were left to face their technological adolescence alone, with the overwhelming statistical probability that they would join the 266 civilizations that had already experienced termination events. Is there anything else I need to know? Marcus asked. Echo and Nova exchanged their light communication one more time before Nova responded with what seemed like careful consideration. One additional factor consistently observed in successful species: individuals who accept responsibility for collective outcomes rather than focusing solely on personal circumstances. Your question patterns suggest this characteristic. Positive assessment indicator. As the twins began moving toward the portal, Marcus felt a surge of urgency. Wait, he called out. How can I contact you if something important happens? What if humanity does something that could affect the evaluation? Nova paused at the portal's edge. Emergency contact protocols unnecessary. Continuous observation maintained. All significant events recorded and analyzed in real time. Your role involves continued behavioral authenticity, not active intervention in species development patterns. Will I see you again? Regular contact schedule maintained until evaluation completion, Echo replied. Next session in 48-hour intervals. Additional sessions possible if assessment requirements necessitate. As they stepped through the portal, Nova turned back one final time. Human designate Marcus, your species possesses significant potential. Evaluation outcome not predetermined. Individual choices aggregate to collective destiny. The portal closed, leaving Marcus alone with those final words echoing in his mind. Individual choices aggregate to collective destiny. He was just one person among billions, but somehow his choices, along with those of 46 other contact individuals and 7 billion other humans, would determine whether humanity survived its technological adolescence or joined the cosmic graveyard of failed civilizations. Marcus spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about cooperation and competition, about the patterns that had led other species to success or failure, and about what he could possibly do as one individual to help tip the scales in humanity's favor. By morning, he had begun to form the outline of a plan.
Chishi to cell down at the top.
The next day, Marcus did something he'd never done before. He called in sick to work, despite feeling perfectly healthy, and spent the day researching every major global challenge humanity currently faced. Climate change, political polarization, economic inequality, nuclear proliferation, information warfare, resource depletion. The list seemed overwhelming when viewed as a whole. But as he studied each issue, Marcus began to see them through the lens of his conversations with Echo and Nova. These weren't separate problems. They were all manifestations of humanity's struggle with technological adolescence. Every challenge on his list was fundamentally about how humans were adapting or failing to adapt to the rapid pace of technological change. More importantly, Marcus realized that each of these challenges had potential solutions that already existed within human knowledge and capability. The missing element wasn't technology or resources, it was cooperation. The same factor that had determined success or failure for the 312 species the twins had observed. By evening, Marcus had drafted a document he'd never imagined writing. It outlined humanity's current challenges, potential solutions, and most importantly, a framework for approaching these problems from a species survival perspective rather than through the lens of competing national, economic, or ideological interests. He wasn't sure what he intended to do with the document, but writing it had helped him clarify his thoughts. When Echo and Nova returned in 2 days, he would be ready with more pointed questions about how individual actions could influence collective outcomes without violating their non-interference protocols. As midnight approached, Marcus found himself looking forward to the next contact session with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Each conversation brought new understanding of humanity's position in the cosmic order, but also new awareness of how precarious that position truly was. 35 days remained in the evaluation period, and Marcus was beginning to understand that those 35 days might be the most important in human history. The question that haunted him as he tried to sleep was whether humanity had the wisdom to recognize the test it was taking and the courage to pass it. The third contact session arrived with Marcus feeling more prepared than he had since this extraordinary situation began. He'd spent the intervening days not just researching humanity's challenges, but also studying historical examples of rapid social cooperation during crisis periods. The pattern was encouraging. Humans were capable of remarkable unity and sacrifice when they truly understood the stakes. As the portal materialized at 11:47 p.m., Marcus noticed that Echo and Nova emerged with what appeared to be additional equipment. Alongside their translation device, Nova now carried a crystalline structure that pulsed with the same blue light as their eyes, while Echo held what looked like a more sophisticated version of their communication devices. Human designate Marcus. Nova's translated voice carried what seemed like increased urgency. Evaluation status requires immediate discussion. Significant developments detected across multiple observation parameters. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Bad developments? Mixed assessment indicators, Echo replied, the device in his hands projecting holographic displays that showed incomprehensible symbols and patterns. Some observation points demonstrate positive adaptation responses. Others indicate accelerating failure trajectories. Species approaching critical decision threshold. What kind of critical decision? Nova activated the crystalline device, and suddenly the air in Marcus's bedroom filled with three-dimensional displays that looked like global maps overlaid with data streams. Marcus could recognize continents and major cities, but the overlay information was completely foreign to him. Current planetary stress indicators approaching historical failure point correlations, Nova explained. Climate system disruption accelerating beyond previous projection parameters. Political fragmentation increasing rather than decreasing under pressure. Resource competition intensifying instead of generating cooperation protocols. Marcus studied the displays, trying to understand what he was seeing. The data seemed to show various hotspots around the globe, some pulsing red while others maintained blue or green colorations. But you said there were positive indicators too, he prompted. Echo manipulated his device, and the holographic displays shifted to highlight different regions. Positive responses detected in multiple sectors, scientific cooperation increasing across political boundaries.
individual behavioral adaptation spreading through social networks, emergency response protocols demonstrating enhanced collective capability. The individual contacts, Marcus realized. The 47 people you're monitoring.
Are we making a difference? The twins exchanged their light communication, and Marcus noticed that the pattern seemed more rapid and complex than in previous sessions. When Nova responded, there was something almost like excitement in the translated voice. Individual contact outcomes exceeding projection parameters. 47 contact subjects demonstrating remarkable adaptation characteristics. Behavioral changes propagating through social connections at rates previously unobserved in developing species. Marcus felt a surge of hope. What kind of behavioral changes? Contact subject designated Elena 7 initiated community resource sharing protocol in Mediterranean coastal region. Echo explained. What? Network effects demonstrate 60% reduction in local resource competition within 14-day period. Nova added. Contact subject designated James 23 developed information verification system for social media platforms. Implementation spreading rapidly across North American networks. Misinformation proliferation decreasing in coverage areas. Contact subject designated Yuki 31 organized international scientific collaboration, bypassing traditional governmental restrictions. Research sharing accelerating across multiple disciplines. Marcus listened to example after example, realizing that his fellow contact subjects around the world were taking action inspired by their encounters with Echo and Nova.
More importantly, those actions were spreading beyond the initial individuals, creating ripple effects throughout human society.
What about me? Marcus asked. Have I contributed anything useful to the evaluation? The twins' light exchange seemed almost animated before Echo responded. Your documentation of species survival framework demonstrates significant analytical capability.
Pattern recognition and solution synthesis approaching successful species baseline requirements. Marcus felt confused. My documentation?
I haven't shared anything with anyone. Nova manipulated the crystalline device, and new displays appeared showing Marcus's apartment, his computer, and various documents and research materials he'd been working on.
Continuous observation protocols include monitoring of all contact subject activities. Nova explained. Your analytical work regarding collective problem-solving approaches demonstrates thinking patterns consistent with successful species characteristics. But I haven't done anything with that analysis, Marcus protested.
I was waiting to ask you whether sharing it would violate your non-interference protocols. Question itself indicates wisdom development, Echo replied. However, observation period approaching critical phase. Individual action authorization may be modified based on current assessment requirements. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate. Are you saying I could actually do something with my research?
That sharing it wouldn't interfere with the evaluation? The twins engaged in what appeared to be an extended discussion through their light patterns. Marcus counted at least 3 minutes of rapid light exchanges before Nova finally responded. Modified protocols authorize limited information dissemination by contact subjects during final evaluation phase.
Species must demonstrate independent capability for beneficial information integration. External data source irrelevant if species lacks wisdom to utilize information constructively.
Marcus wasn't entirely sure he understood the distinction they were making, but it seemed like he was being given permission to share his analysis of humanity's challenges and potential solutions. There's something I need to understand better, Marcus said.
You mentioned that successful species show enhanced cooperation under pressure, but humanity seems to be moving in the opposite direction.
How do we change that trajectory? Echo activated his device, and the holographic displays shifted to show historical data streams. Successful species typically experience catalyst events that demonstrate cooperation benefits versus competition costs. Natural disasters requiring coordinated response. Resource scarcities demanding sharing protocols. External threats necessitating unified action. External threats, Marcus asked, a new worry forming in his mind.
Are you talking about invasion scenarios? Not invasion, Nova clarified. Successful species often unite in response to recognition of evaluation itself.
Understanding that species survival depends on collective behavioral demonstration rather than individual or group advantage. Marcus stared at the aliens, the implications of their statement hitting him like a revelation.
You're saying that knowing about the evaluation about the test could itself be the catalyst for cooperation? Theoretical possibility confirmed by historical precedent, Echo replied. Species designation Cathara achieved unity through recognition of external evaluation. Information regarding cosmic perspective generated immediate priority restructuring, Individual territorial concerns abandoned in favor of species advancement goals. Species designation Meridian achieved cooperation through understanding of galactic community membership requirements, Nova added. Competition paradigms abandoned when broader context became clear. Marcus felt his mind racing through the possibilities. If other humans knew what he knew, that humanity was being evaluated for cosmic citizenship, that the stakes were species survival or extinction, that cooperation was the key factor in determining success, would that knowledge be enough to overcome the political, economic, and ideological divisions that seemed to be tearing human civilization apart? How many of the other contact subjects have figured this out? He asked. Current assessment indicates 12 of 47 contact subjects have reached similar conclusions regarding information dissemination potential, Nova responded. Network effects from those 12 subjects already generating measurable impact on regional cooperation indices. What kind of impact? Echo manipulated his displays to show new data streams. International research collaboration increasing by 47% in regions with active contact subject influence. Resource sharing agreements increasing by 23%. Political cooperation on environmental issues increasing by 31%. Most significantly, public discourse regarding species-level thinking increasing by 89%. Marcus felt stunned. 12 people, sharing their understanding of humanity's cosmic situation, were already creating measurable changes in how humans cooperated with each other. The ripple effects were spreading through social networks, academic institutions, and even political systems. How much time do we have left? Marcus asked. 28 planetary rotation cycles remaining in evaluation period, Nova replied. Current trajectory analysis indicates potential for successful outcome if positive trends continue to accelerate. And if they don't? The pause was longer than usual before Echo responded. Failure probability currently calculated at 60 to 8% based on competing negative trend analysis. Species still demonstrates significant fragmentation under pressure. Individual territorial behavior increasing in multiple regions. Resource competition accelerating despite availability of cooperation alternatives. Marcus understood. Humanity was balanced on a knife's edge, with slightly better than 1 in 3 odds of passing the cosmic test. The actions of the contact subjects were making a difference, but it might not be enough to overcome humanity's tendency toward conflict and competition. What can I do? Marcus asked. What's the most effective way to share this information? The twins exchanged their light communication again, and Marcus noticed that their patterns seemed more urgent than before. Optimal information dissemination strategy varies by cultural context, Nova explained. Your analytical framework demonstrates high compatibility with scientific and educational communities. Technical presentation of cooperation benefits may generate more effective response than emotional appeals regarding species survival. Additionally, Echo added, network effects maximize when information spreads through trusted social connections rather than mass media distribution. Individual credibility essential for message acceptance. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand their advice. Rather than trying to make some grand public announcement that would likely be dismissed as fantasy, he should focus on sharing his analysis with people who knew and trusted him, particularly those in positions to influence others. Can you give me any other guidance? Marcus asked. Any specific information that would be most helpful for people to understand? One factor consistently observed in successful species, Nova replied. Recognition that individual success meaningless without collective survival. Successful species achieve understanding that cooperation generates benefits unavailable through competition. Resources become more abundant when shared efficiently rather than hoarded defensively. Echo added, most important concept. Successful species recognize evaluation period as opportunity rather than threat. Crisis situations reveal true species character. Current evaluation period offers humanity chance to demonstrate advancement readiness rather than representing external judgment. As the twins began preparing to leave, Marcus felt a new sense of purpose crystallizing in his mind. He had 28 days to help humanity understand its situation and choose cooperation over competition. The task seemed impossible when he considered the scale of global politics and economics, but the examples Echo and Nova had shared proved that individual actions could create profound ripple effects. One last question, Marcus said as the portal began to reopen behind the twins. If humanity passes the evaluation, when would we know? When would first contact become official? Successful evaluation immediately followed by formal contact protocols, Nova replied. Galactic Cooperative Network representatives initiate open communication with planetary leadership. Technology sharing begins. Cultural exchange programs activated. And if we fail? Observation terminates without notification. Portal access discontinued.
Species development continues independently. Natural evolutionary processes proceed without external influence.
As Echo stepped toward the portal, he paused and turned back to Marcus. Human designate Marcus. Your species possesses extraordinary potential. Individual adaptability and creativity approaching unprecedented levels. Collective cooperation capability exists within species baseline characteristics. Outcome dependent on whether individuals choose species benefit over personal advantage during remaining evaluation period. Nova added, remember, successful species view evaluation as invitation to cosmic citizenship rather than threat to independence. Perspective determines response patterns. The portal closed, leaving Marcus alone with a profound understanding of his responsibility. He represented not just himself, but humanity's future among the stars. The next 28 days would determine whether his species joined a galactic community or faced extinction alone. Marcus spent the rest of the night finalizing his analysis document, this time with the knowledge that sharing it was not just permitted but potentially crucial for humanity's survival. He identified the key people in his network, colleagues with connections to research institutions, friends working in international organizations, family members involved in community leadership who might be most effective at spreading the message. By dawn, Marcus had created a communication strategy that could reach thousands of people within days, all through trusted personal connections rather than mass media that could easily dismiss his message. The document he prepared focused on the scientific and logical case for enhanced global cooperation, presenting the benefits in terms that people could understand and act upon. As he prepared to begin what might be the most important communication effort in human history, Marcus realized that Echo and Nova had been right about successful species viewing evaluation as opportunity rather than threat. For the first time since the aliens had appeared in his bedroom, he felt genuinely hopeful about humanity's chances. The test was no longer something being done to humanity. It was something humanity could actively pass through its own choices and actions. And Marcus was determined to make sure his species made the right choices while there was still time.
Armed with Echo and Nova's implicit permission to share information, he began reaching out to his network with carefully crafted messages that presented his analysis of global cooperation benefits without initially mentioning alien contact. His approach proved more effective than he'd dared hope.
Dr. Sarah Chen, his former professor at MIT, found his framework compelling enough to share with her colleagues in the university's International Development Program. Within 3 days, Marcus received an email from a researcher at the United Nations who wanted to discuss his cooperation metrics with the Climate Change Advisory Council. Marcus's brother Jake, who worked for a tech startup focused on social media analytics, helped adapt the framework for digital platforms. They created a series of interactive presentations that demonstrated how cooperation strategies produced better outcomes than competitive approaches across multiple scenarios: economic development, environmental protection, resource distribution, and conflict resolution. The most surprising response came from Dr.
Elena Rodriguez, a colleague from his software engineering days who had transitioned into international humanitarian work. When Marcus shared his analysis with her, she responded within hours with excitement that bordered on euphoria.
Marcus, this is exactly what we've been seeing in the field, Elena wrote.
There's this underground movement of people pushing for exactly the kind of cooperation models you've outlined. It's like everyone suddenly realized we need to work together or we're all going to fail separately.
When Marcus called Elena to discuss her response, she told him about similar frameworks that had been appearing across different sectors and regions. Environmental groups were collaborating with business leaders in unprecedented ways. International research institutions were sharing data and resources without traditional competitive restrictions. Even political organizations that had been adversaries were finding common ground on species-level challenges.
It's the weirdest thing, Elena said. People are talking about species survival thinking, like it's a new concept that just occurred to everyone simultaneously.
Have you heard that phrase anywhere else? Marcus had indeed heard that exact phrase from Echo and Nova during their discussions of successful civilizations. The realization that the term was spreading through human discourse exactly as the aliens had predicted gave him chills.
Elena, Marcus said carefully, what if I told you there was a reason this movement is happening now? A specific catalyst that's driving these changes? I'd say I'm listening, Elena replied.
Because honestly, the timing and coordination feel too organized to be coincidental. Marcus took a deep breath and made a decision that could change everything. Can we meet in person?
There's something I need to show you, and it's not something I can discuss over the phone.
They arranged to meet at Elena's apartment in Boston the following evening.
Marcus spent the intervening day preparing materials that would help Elena understand the situation without immediately dismissing him as delusional.
He printed out his analysis documents, gathered news articles showing the cooperation trend she'd mentioned, and prepared a timeline of global events that correlated with what he knew about the alien evaluation period. Elena's reaction to his revelations proved more accepting than Marcus had expected.
She listened to his account of the midnight visits with scientific curiosity rather than skepticism, asking detailed questions about the aliens' technology, their communication methods, and their evaluation criteria. "You know," Elena said after Marcus finished his explanation, "this actually makes sense of a lot of things we've been seeing.
The timing, the global nature of the cooperation movement, the specific focus on species-level thinking, it fits a pattern that would be almost impossible to generate organically."
"You believe me?" Marcus asked. "I believe you've experienced something that you're interpreting as alien contact," Elena replied carefully. "And whether the source of your information is extraterrestrial or some kind of psychological breakthrough, the framework you've developed is demonstrably effective at promoting beneficial social changes."
Marcus appreciated Elena's scientific caution, but he also sensed that she was more convinced than she was willing to admit. Over the next several hours, they worked together to refine his communication strategy, identifying key individuals and organizations that could amplify the cooperation message most effectively.
Elena's connections proved invaluable. Through her humanitarian network, she had relationships with people working in international development, environmental protection, conflict resolution, and global health initiatives. Many of these individuals had been noticing the same cooperation trends that Elena had observed, and they were eager to understand the theoretical framework behind the movement.
Within a week of Marcus's meeting with Elena, his analysis had reached policymakers at the World Health Organization, researchers at major climate science institutions, and coordinators of several international peace-building initiatives. Each person who encountered the framework seemed to recognize its relevance to their work and shared it with their own networks.
The ripple effect was accelerating exponentially, exactly as Echo and Nova had predicted based on their observations of other successful species. Marcus's next scheduled contact session arrived, with him feeling cautiously optimistic about humanity's progress. When Echo and Nova emerged from the portal, they immediately activated their holographic displays, and Marcus could see that the global cooperation indicators had shifted dramatically. "Remarkable developments detected across multiple observation parameters," Nova announced. "Cooperation indices increasing at rates unprecedented in our observation experience. Individual contact subject network effects exceeding all previous species comparison data." Echo manipulated his devices to show new visualizations, political cooperation agreements increasing by 78% across multiple international boundaries, resource sharing initiatives expanding at exponential rates, scientific collaboration breaking through traditional competitive barriers.
Most significantly, Nova added, public discourse demonstrating widespread adoption of species survival thinking patterns. Collective problem-solving approaches replacing competitive resource acquisition behaviors in multiple cultural contexts.
Marcus felt a surge of pride and hope. "Are we going to pass the evaluation?" The twins exchanged their light communication, and Marcus noticed that the patterns seemed more complex than ever before. When they responded, there was something almost like excitement in their translated voices.
"Current trajectory analysis indicates success probability increasing to 82%, Echo replied. "However, critical challenges remain. Opposition forces generating counter-responses to cooperation trends. Competitive paradigm advocates resisting species-level thinking adoption." Nova activated new displays showing regions of the world where the cooperation trends were facing resistance. Traditional power structures perceiving cooperation movement as threat to established hierarchies. Resource competition increasing in regions where cooperation benefits not yet demonstrated successfully. Marcus studied the displays, recognizing that the resistance was coming primarily from institutions and individuals whose power depended on maintaining competitive rather than cooperative social structures. "What can we do about the opposition?" Marcus asked. "Opposition response patterns consistent with historical precedent," Nova explained. "Successful species typically experience resistance phase during evaluation period. Key factor: whether cooperation advocates maintain nonviolent persuasion approaches or resort to competitive suppression of opposition." Echo added, "Species failure often occurs during resistance phase when cooperation advocates abandon cooperative principles to fight opposition. Contradiction demonstrates insufficient commitment to cooperative paradigm." Marcus understood the trap. If the cooperation movement responded to resistance by trying to force change through competitive means, it would prove that humanity hadn't truly internalized the cooperative mindset that successful species required.
So we have to remain cooperative even when dealing with people who are actively working against cooperation? Marcus asked.
Precisely. Successful species demonstrate that cooperative principles apply universally, not selectively based on others' behaviors, Nova confirmed.
Cooperation strength measured by maintenance under pressure, not by results under favorable conditions. The challenge seemed almost impossible. How could cooperative approaches overcome opposition from people who were actively benefiting from competitive systems and would resist change through any means necessary?
Can you give us any guidance on effective non-competitive approaches to resistance? Marcus asked. The twins' light exchange lasted several minutes before Echo responded.
Historical analysis indicates most effective approach involves demonstration of cooperation benefits rather than argumentation against competition costs. Successful implementation of cooperative systems generates results that convince opposition through evidence rather than persuasion.
Nova added. Additionally, inclusive cooperation strategies often convert opposition by offering benefits that exceed competitive alternatives. Exclusion of opposition groups reinforces competitive paradigms. Inclusion opportunities allow resistance to transform into participation. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand the strategy. Rather than trying to defeat opposition to cooperation, the movement needed to demonstrate that cooperative approaches could provide better outcomes for everyone, including those who currently benefited from competitive systems.
How much time do we have left? Marcus asked.
14 planetary rotation cycles remaining in evaluation period, Nova replied. Current positive trends must accelerate to overcome resistance patterns.
Opposition response will likely intensify as evaluation conclusion approaches. 14 days. 2 weeks for humanity to prove that its newfound commitment to cooperation was genuine and sustainable rather than a temporary response to crisis. There's something else I need to know, Marcus said. What happens during the transition if we pass? How does humanity integrate with this galactic community you mentioned? Echo activated his displays to show what appeared to be star charts and complex organizational structures.
Galactic Cooperative Network comprises 217 successful species across local galactic region. Each species maintains cultural sovereignty while participating in collective resource sharing, knowledge exchange, and exploration initiatives.
New member species receive technology assistance for sustainable energy, environmental restoration, and interstellar communication, Nova explained. Additionally, access to collective knowledge database containing scientific, cultural, and philosophical developments from all member civilizations. Marcus tried to imagine human civilization with access to the accumulated knowledge of 217 alien species. The technological advancement alone would transform every aspect of human life, but the cultural and philosophical exchanges might be even more profound.
What about our current problems? Marcus asked. Climate change, resource scarcity, political conflicts. Would joining this network solve those issues? Network membership provides tools for problem resolution, Echo replied.
However, each species must demonstrate capability for independent problem solving before receiving assistance. External dependency prevents authentic development.
Successful species prove worthiness through self-directed achievement, Nova added. Current human cooperation trends demonstrate exactly the capabilities required for network membership.
If evaluation period concludes successfully, transition assistance provided for sustainable development rather than replacement of human systems. As the aliens prepared to leave, Marcus felt the weight of the next 2 weeks pressing down on him.
Humanity was so close to passing the greatest test in its history, but the resistance movements Echo and Nova had identified could still derail everything. Is there anything specific I should focus on during these final weeks? Marcus asked.
Maintain cooperative principles regardless of opposition responses, Echo advised. Demonstrate inclusion rather than exclusion approaches.
Focus on practical benefits rather than theoretical arguments. Remember that successful species prove cooperation strength through consistent application under pressure.
Nova paused at the portal's edge. Human designate Marcus. Your species has exceeded our initial projections.
Individual network effects generating collective transformation at remarkable speed, outcome now dependent on maintenance of current trajectory during pressure testing phase.
As the portal closed, Marcus realized that the next 2 weeks would be the ultimate test of whether humanity had truly learned the lessons that separated successful species from failed ones. The cooperation movement had momentum, but it would need to prove its strength by remaining cooperative even when faced with determined opposition.
Marcus spent the rest of the night developing strategies for helping the cooperation movement maintain its principles while effectively countering resistance. The challenge would be enormous, but for the first time since this extraordinary journey began, he truly believed humanity had a chance to pass the test and claim its place among the stars.
The next morning, Marcus began reaching out to Elena and his other key contacts with a new message. The cooperation movement was about to face its greatest challenge, and how it responded would determine not just its success, but the future of human civilization itself. The final 2 weeks of humanity's evaluation period arrived with the cooperation movement facing its greatest test.
Marcus had been working around the clock with Elena and their expanding network of contacts to prepare for what Echo and Nova had warned would be an intensification of resistance to the species-level thinking that was spreading across the globe. The opposition manifested in ways that were both predictable and surprisingly sophisticated. Traditional power structures that benefited from competitive rather than cooperative systems began organizing coordinated responses to what some media outlets had started calling the unity movement. Corporate interests that profited from resource scarcity launched public relations campaigns arguing that cooperation was economically inefficient. Political organizations that maintained power through division began promoting narratives that painted cooperation advocates as naive idealists who didn't understand human nature.
More concerning were the efforts to co-opt the movement itself. Marcus noticed that some organizations had begun promoting their own versions of cooperation that maintained existing power hierarchies while using collaborative language. These false cooperation initiatives threatened to confuse the public about what genuine species-level cooperation actually meant. Marcus shared these concerns during his penultimate contact session with Echo and Nova, who emerged from their portal with displays that showed the resistance patterns developing across the globe.
Opposition responses following predicted patterns, Nova confirmed. However, resistance sophistication exceeding typical parameters for developing species. Human capacity for information manipulation demonstrates advanced social technology capabilities. Echo's displays highlighted specific regions where the opposition was most organized. Counter-cooperation campaigns utilizing advanced psychological manipulation techniques. Message targeting designed to exploit individual fear responses regarding collective decision-making processes. Are these resistance patterns normal? Marcus asked.
Do other species face similar challenges? All successful species experience resistance phases, Nova replied. However, human resistance demonstrates unusual sophistication.
Opposition groups learning to mimic cooperation language while maintaining competitive paradigms, deception capabilities approaching advanced species baseline requirements.
Marcus felt a chill. You're saying the opposition is so good at deception that it's actually evidence of human advancement? Paradoxical situation, Echo confirmed.
Species demonstrating both exceptional cooperation potential and exceptional manipulation capabilities. Outcome dependent on which paradigm achieves dominance during final evaluation period. The twins showed Marcus data indicating that the genuine cooperation movement was still growing, but more slowly than before as people became confused by competing messages about what cooperation actually meant. The sophisticated opposition was succeeding in muddying the waters enough to slow the movement's momentum.
What can we do to counter sophisticated deception without resorting to competitive tactics ourselves? Marcus asked. Historical precedent indicates most effective approach involves practical demonstration rather than argumentative persuasion, Nova explained.
Opposition arguments lose effectiveness when cooperation benefits become undeniably visible through direct experience. Echo added. Additionally, transparency regarding cooperation principles prevents co-optation attempts. Clear definitions of genuine cooperation versus false cooperation, essential for movement integrity. Marcus spent the session learning about specific techniques that successful species had used to maintain movement integrity during resistance phases.
The keys seemed to be focusing on concrete, measurable outcomes that demonstrated cooperation benefits while maintaining complete openness about methods and principles. When Marcus returned from that session, he found Elena waiting for him with urgent news.
We've got a problem, Elena said. 3 major international development projects that were using your cooperation framework have been infiltrated by organizations that are using cooperative language but implementing traditional competitive structures.
The participants are getting confused about what they're actually supposed to be doing. Marcus felt his heart sink.
This was exactly the kind of co-optation that Echo and Nova had warned about. How bad is the confusion? Bad enough that 2 of the projects have stalled completely, Elena replied. People are arguing about which cooperation approach is correct instead of actually cooperating. The irony is painful. Marcus realized this was a critical moment.
How the cooperation movement responded to this challenge would demonstrate whether humanity had truly internalized cooperative principles or had simply adopted cooperative language to achieve competitive goals. What if we try complete transparency, Marcus suggested.
Instead of arguing about which approach is correct,
What if we openly share all the information we have about cooperation principles and let people see the differences for themselves? Elena raised an eyebrow. You mean tell people about your alien contacts?
Not necessarily, Marcus replied, though he was beginning to think full disclosure might be necessary.
But we could share everything Echo and Nova have told me about what successful cooperation actually looks like, without necessarily mentioning the source. Over the next 3 days, Marcus and Elena worked with their network to develop what they called the Cooperation Clarity Project. Instead of trying to compete with false cooperation initiatives, they created comprehensive resources that outlined the specific characteristics of genuine species-level cooperation versus traditional competitive approaches disguised in cooperative language. The resources included practical tests that groups could use to evaluate whether their cooperation was authentic, measuring whether benefits were genuinely shared, whether decision-making was truly collective, whether individual advancement was tied to group advancement, and whether the cooperation could be sustained under pressure.
The Cooperation Clarity Project spread through the network even faster than Marcus's original framework had. Within a week, people around the world were using the evaluation tools to assess their own cooperation initiatives, and the results were revealing. Many groups discovered they had been implementing false cooperation without realizing it, while others found validation that their approaches aligned with genuine cooperative principles. More importantly, the Clarity Project began converting some of the opposition groups. When presented with concrete evidence that genuine cooperation produced better outcomes than false cooperation, and that both were superior to traditional competitive approaches, some organizations began shifting their strategies.
Sarah Chen called Marcus with news that perfectly illustrated the shift occurring globally. The UN Climate Council just voted to implement your cooperation framework for the upcoming Resource Allocation Summit, she reported.
But here's the interesting part. 3 corporations that had been lobbying against cooperative resource sharing actually requested to participate using genuine cooperation principles after they saw the Cooperation Clarity Project results. Marcus felt a surge of hope, but Elena brought sobering news the same day. The opposition is regrouping, she warned.
They're planning what they're calling a reality check campaign to launch this weekend. From what I can gather, they're going to argue that all this cooperation talk is preventing necessary competitive innovation and economic growth. The gay still soons wasn't available time anymore.
As Marcus prepared for what might be his final contact session with Echo and Nova, he realized that humanity's evaluation period was ending exactly as the aliens had predicted, with the cooperation movement facing its ultimate test under pressure. The next few days would determine whether humans could maintain cooperative principles while responding to organized competitive opposition.
When Echo and Nova emerged from their portal for what Marcus knew would be their last scheduled contact, they immediately activated displays showing global cooperation indices. The data was more complex than Marcus had ever seen, with multiple trend lines that seemed to be fluctuating rapidly.
Evaluation period approaching completion in 72 hours, Nova announced. Final assessment requires observation of species response to maximum pressure testing scenarios.
Opposition initiatives launching comprehensive challenge to cooperation, paradigm, sustainability. Echo manipulated his displays to show projected scenarios for the next 3 days.
Current trajectory indicates potential for either remarkable success or significant failure. Outcome dependent on cooperation. Movement response to direct competitive attack. What kind of competitive attack? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. Opposition groups implementing simultaneous campaigns designed to prove cooperation inefficiency through manufactured crisis scenarios, Nova explained.
Resource hoarding initiatives, information restriction protocols, competitive advantage demonstrations. Designed to pressure cooperation advocates into abandoning principles under stress.
Marcus understood.
The opposition was going to create artificial scarcity and competition to try to prove that cooperation was impractical when resources became limited or when competitive advantage was at stake. How can the cooperation movement respond without abandoning cooperative principles? Marcus asked.
Critical test for species advancement, Echo replied. Successful species maintain cooperation, especially during manufactured scarcity.
Abundance mindset must supersede scarcity responses. Resource sharing increases rather than decreases during pressure testing.
Nova added, additionally, successful species demonstrate that cooperation creates abundance rather than merely distributing scarcity. Competitive pressure must be met with cooperative innovation that generates beneficial outcomes for all participants, including opposition groups.
As Marcus absorbed this guidance, he realized that the final test wasn't just about maintaining cooperation under pressure. It was about proving that cooperation could actually solve the problems that competition claimed to address more effectively.
Is there anything else I need to know before the evaluation concludes? Marcus asked.
The twins exchanged their light communication for what seemed like an extended period before Nova responded with what sounded like finality. Human designate Marcus. Your species has demonstrated exceptional potential throughout evaluation period. Individual network effects and collective adaptation capabilities exceed our initial projections. However, final assessment requires species response to ultimate choice between competitive advantage and cooperative advancement. Echo added, next 72 hours will determine whether humanity joins galactic cooperative network or continues independent development. Outcome reflects authentic species character under maximum pressure conditions.
As the twins prepared to leave, Marcus felt the enormity of the moment settling on his shoulders. Everything that had happened over the past weeks, his late-night conversations with beings from another star system, the global cooperation movement that had grown from those conversations, the resistance that movement was now facing, all of it was coming to a single point of decision that would determine humanity's cosmic future.
Will I see you again? Marcus asked. If species evaluation successful, formal contact protocols initiate immediately upon assessment completion, Nova replied.
If unsuccessful, observation terminates without further individual contact authorization. Echo paused at the portal's threshold. Human designate Marcus. Remember that individual choices aggregate to collective destiny. Your species' future determined by choices made by individuals like yourself during next 72 hours. Maintain cooperation principles regardless of opposition pressure. As the portal closed for what might be the last time, Marcus realized that his extraordinary journey was entering its final phase. The next 3 days would determine whether humanity took its place among the stars or faced its future alone. Marcus spent that night sending a final message to everyone in his network. The message was simple but comprehensive. Humanity was facing its greatest test. And how each person chose to respond, with cooperation or competition, would determine the species' future. He shared everything Echo and Nova had taught him about maintaining cooperative principles under pressure, about creating abundance rather than distributing scarcity, and about proving cooperation's effectiveness through practical demonstration rather than theoretical argument. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Elena called within an hour to report that similar messages were flowing through networks around the world.
The cooperation movement wasn't just preparing to face its final test. It was transforming that test into an opportunity to demonstrate everything it had learned about species-level thinking and genuine collaboration. As dawn broke on the first day of humanity's final examination, Marcus looked out his bedroom window at a world that seemed poised between two possible futures.
In 72 hours, he would know whether the choice his species made would lead to cosmic citizenship or cosmic isolation. For the first time since Echo and Nova had first appeared in his room, Marcus felt completely confident about the outcome. Humanity had learned the lessons that separated successful species from failed ones, and in the next 3 days, it would prove worthy of its place among the stars. The cooperation movement had grown beyond anything Marcus could have imagined when he first encountered two alien beings in his bedroom at midnight.
Now, it was time to see whether humanity would pass the ultimate test of character under pressure and claim its cosmic destiny among the galactic cooperative network. As Marcus prepared to join the final phase of his species' greatest challenge, he realized that his midnight visitors had given humanity something far more valuable than advanced technology or cosmic knowledge. They had given humans the opportunity to discover their own capacity for cooperation, growth, and advancement.
Whether humanity seized that opportunity would be determined in the next 72 hours. But Marcus had never been more proud to be part of a species capable of rising to meet such an extraordinary challenge.